Bread and benedictions. In my mother's house, she baked breads swollen with breaths of yeast, and she lit candles, saying benedictions through lips that flickered like the light she blessed, saying sounds that talked in steps sewn like stitches in a cloth. She gave me her needle, whose swift, slender shaft went straight to my heart, where it has lodged all these years like a restive splinter, waiting for the flicker of the ancient lights to flash again above the benedictions told over bread in dreams of innocence. Candles are one of those elemental symbols. The lighting of flame goes back to our earliest days of civilization. It also connects us to one of the core rituals of Jewish life, the lighting of candles at special moments, at special holidays, and every week as part of Shabbat, creates family space, creates community space, and connects us with that past that stretches on beyond knowing, and hopefully to a future that stretches on beyond our own possibility. This evening, to light our Shabbat candles, I'd like to invite our Onik hosts tonight. They are Bruce and Eliza Klein, so please come forward as we hear sing, and we sing, Baruch HaOr, let us light these lights. In the Hebrew Bible, in the books of the prophets, the symbol of the vine was a symbol of peace. Remember the famous line that each person shall lie under their vine and their fig tree and be not afraid. The vine, of course, takes time. It takes stability. It takes predictability to be able to grow and to harvest, to press into juice, to ferment into wine. All of that takes the stability, the peace of stability, the peace of predictability. And so when we think of the vine, we think of the fig tree, we think of roots in the soil, the promise of the farmer, the hope of peace. This evening I'll sing our Kiddush in Hebrew. We have wine to share after our service as well, and then we can say the English all together. Savri Maranan V'Rabanan De'etmo Kidashnu et hayayin Savri Maranan V'Rabanan De'hayom Baruchim Borei Pri Hagafen HaShabbat Mesamcheinu HaShabbat Merapeinu Legufotenu Lenafshotenu HaShabbat Me'ashreinu Baruchim HaShomrim Et Yom HaShabbat. Please say with me, the rabbis and sages of old proclaimed, we sanctify this wine. The rabbis and sages of today proclaim, blessed is the fruit of the vine. Shabbat makes us joyful. Shabbat heals us in body and in spirit. Shabbat enriches us. Blessed are those who keep the Shabbat. L'chaim, to life. Good choice. And so now a song that again expresses what we hope for ourselves and for the world. It is our version of Shalom Aleichem, which praises those people who pursue peace and who love peace. traditional version, praising the unity of God and promises of divine reward, but also threats of divine punishment. Yet we know that even if there is no conscious personality running the world, there are disasters, and there are joys, and there is human responsibility to work against one and for the other. And so this next two readings offer two versions of a modern approach to this Shema, the idea of to listen, to hear, and then to act. The first is by the Holocaust survivor Primo Levi, and the second by the modern liturgist and poet Marcia Falk. You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty and womb cold as a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I command these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble, disease render you powerless, your offspring avert their faces from you. And by Marcia Falk. With all our heart and all our spirit, all our senses and strength, we take upon ourselves and into ourselves these promises: to care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. We will teach this to our children through the passage of the day, as we dwell in our homes and as we go on our journeys, from the time we rise until we fall asleep. And may our actions be faithful to our words, that our children's children may live to know truth and kindness have embraced, peace and justice have kissed, and are one. And so to celebrate that promise of collaboration and working together for peace and for prosperity, I invite us to sing together, Hine Ma Tov, behold how good and pleasant it is for family to dwell together. If I could ask those present here to stand for a moment. Those online, you're welcome to stand if you choose. Earlier this week, we marked a period called Shloshim. In traditional Jewish practice, many people are familiar with Shiva, the 7 days of prescribed mourning. Yet in the more Orthodox communities, and in some conservative and Reform and even Humanistic congregations and in individual families, another period is marked. It is the period of Shloshim, the 30 days. If a parent dies, it is traditional to treat the 30 like they are the 7, and to have those rigorous prescribed mourning rituals last a full month. Now, what happened in Israel on October 7th was a communal trauma, a trauma of individual families, and the destruction of many universes, because as we remember, each person who saves a life is as if they have saved an entire universe, and the same is true for those who destroy and those who are destroyed. It has been a time of great mourning for the Jewish people. We know that other peoples are also suffering and who have faced loss and pain in this time. And so let us pause for a moment of true reflection, an openness of the heart to feel that pain, to let our empathy go out from us and return to us, and let us be resolved that the next 30 days end better than this. Let us pause for a moment of silent reflection. In the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Proverbs, we read, Zecher tzadik livracha, the memory of a good person is a blessing to us. Please be seated as we hear a song of memory originally written by the Israeli or pre-Israeli Hebrew poet Hannah Senesh, sung both in Hebrew and in English. To my left is our congregational menorah. We light it most Shabbats that we gather together. It has 7 lights, symbolic of the 7 days of the week. They also remind us of the many strands of our individual lives that come together as one community. We have here about 30, 40 people in person. We have 50 screens online. It is a wide net, a wide umbrella that we have spread this evening. And it is a chance for us to light candles of simcha, of joy, of tsuris, of concern. We borrow from the Unitarian tradition, which lights these candles as well, but we adapt it to Jewish life. These can be candles of memory, candles of celebration, or candles of challenge, illness, difficulty, etc. And so I hope if you have something to share, if you're in person, you can come up and please make sure to speak into the microphone so those online can hear the reason behind your candle lighting. If you're online and would like to have a candle lit, you can type something into the chat, and I'm happy to step forward and light the candle on your behalf. So I'll keep an eye on the chat. Anyone in person who would like to light, you can step forward and share perhaps your name and the reason behind your candle lighting, and then light a candle on our menorah. And so this is my act of stopping and creating space. So it's up to you to come up and light or to offer something for which to light online as well. It's not Hanukkah, it doesn't matter which side.
So this is a happy thing to say, but last month, oh, he's looking at me like you're not going to announce it to the world. Last month, my husband and I celebrated 30 years of marriage. As he says, it's 30 long years, but 30 years ago, I married my best friend. So happy belated anniversary.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Someone asked online to light a candle for hope of safe return of all of the hostages being held, and also a request for her daughter and their health. And so thank you for those requests. And then also one more, a candle to courage, because it takes courage to be a Jew in today's world with the presence of increasing anti-Semitism, as it seems. So we'll do 3 on a match for that. That's okay.
I'm Rick Balnick. I'm lighting this candle for 2 birthdays. My granddaughter, who was 4, and my cousin, who is 53. My granddaughter's birthday was on Monday, and on Sunday she had a party with 25 4-year-olds dancing, kind of dancing. She was happy with all of her friends, and then she went home feeling safe and secure. My cousin Rocky, who's 53, lives in Israel. She has no daughters, 6 sons. 4 of them are fighting. 2 of them are too young to fight, so they're volunteering in the hospital. On her birthday yesterday, 2 of the sons who were fighting got a 24-hour pass. So she was surrounded by most of her family, and she was happy and excited as well. I noticed the similarities between the 2 birthdays and the differences.
Online, I saw William sharing that he had a major breakthrough in his job, which is one of those simchas worth celebrating. So a candle for that.
I'm lighting this candle for a friend of ours whose name is Josiane, who lives in France. She's going to go through back surgery, and so we're concerned about that. And also celebrating the fact that Josiane and I found each other much later in our lives, after we were friends in Morocco when we were both children. And then thanks to the internet, she was able to find me. I have not changed my last name, so that helped, I guess. And so I'm just concerned about hoping that she recovers quickly, and also celebrating this amazing friendship that has blossomed. We have been able to see her in Italy, of all places, a few years back, and so just a mixture of emotions.
Online, we have a note from Marcel, who's connecting with us from Europe, where it's much later than it is now. And he says that he's new to humanistic Judaism. He's thrilled to have found a new community to connect to, and so this is a happy candle.
I'm lighting this candle for my son, Mr. Levi. He was honored last week by his job community that helps him find a job and supports him in a job. He's working 12 hours a week, 5 shifts, 2 different jobs with kids. And BJBE, a local synagogue, which I went to many bar and bat mitzvahs to as a child, literally carved out a job for him. This place came to him and said, we're looking for a job for a young disabled adult who's really good with working at kids. And they gave him 2 days a week, 3 hours a day, and they made a professional video of him with the kids. And this week, Levi was concerned that maybe some of the parents didn't like that a disabled adult was working with their kids. And on Shabbat, he reported that the mom came home and said, my son comes home every day and reports that he looks forward to seeing Mr. Levi. So I'm really proud of him.
This last note was another message in the chat from Eliza that was sharing a message of hope from her work at a literary conference in Columbus. One of her sessions was about affirming Jewish students in school, and they're leaning into Jewish joy, and books that feature Jewish joy is a kind of resistance in and of itself. 35 days ago, going on 36, in America we woke up to terrible news. In Israel, they also woke up to terrible news. This news was particularly challenging for Americans who have roots in Israel. They may have family living there. They themselves may have grown up in that country and have moved to other parts of the world. There is a large Israeli diaspora in Europe and in Australia and in North America as well. We are fortunate tonight to have a member of that community, the Israeli-American community, online with us, and she'll be sharing some of her thoughts on what's been happening in the last month and her experiences being Israeli and yet not there through everything that's been going on. Her name is Dikla. She is a member of our rabbinical program based in Israel, but also studying with us here in North America. She lives in Florida, so it's an hour later for her. But I do appreciate that Dikla is able to join us.
Okay, so tomorrow will mark 5 weeks since how we refer it in Israel as the Black Saturday. And to me, it feels kind of like a very one long day since that. My feelings have been on the range of so many different feelings, starting from shock, which I think the whole world experienced, through deep sadness, despair, anger, frustration, disappointment. I do have some positive feelings as well, but I'll get to them at the end. I want to share an experience that I had on a Zoom call that was supposed to be like an open space, safe space for people studying Judaism, humanistic Judaism. Just how we are all feeling. It was from various different institutes. It wasn't just the one that I'm in. And for the first time, I heard a very different voice that I don't think in all my 20 years here in the United States I have ever heard. It's a legitimate voice. It was just very difficult for me to hear, as some people, Jewish people especially, not believing in Israel's right to exist. And we are all like, I'm also feeling sad for any civilian casualties on either side, on every side, as a human being. But at the same time, it was very difficult for me since we are, I think we have a very collective memory of the Holocaust. And right now, what's happening in Israel has nothing to do, in my opinion, with any political opinion. I'm not going to even share mine, but what happened right now in Israel was so shocking, so brutal, so against humanity, not even against Judaism, against humanity. And I was very, very sad and heartbroken to hear. At the end of the call, I talked and shared and said how to me, I understand that some people that might not live or never lived in Israel don't understand, but that for me, and for many of my Israeli friends, it feels like what I believe 9/11 was to the world. And Israel is fighting Hamas. It's not Israelis versus Palestinians. It's Israeli fighting a terror organization. And that I wanted to remind that, in the 19th century, people fled Europe from the pogroms, and then the Holocaust happened, and we said never again, and the world said never again, and yet it is happening. And I feel very scared, I feel very worried, and seeing all the anti-Semitism and seeing also all the diversity in opinions. I, again, completely believe that people should be entitled to their opinion, but seeing what the sites from Israel, I really want to stress that this is not about our political views. It's about humanity, and it's about Israel fighting for the existence of Jewish life. And I was very, very upset after this call, and I want to thank Adam for listening to me and telling me how it's not representing everyone, because for me at that moment it was very, very hard. I want to talk also about the positive. I feel very thankful, first of all, of our school year starting on time and having that community supporting me from Israel, and like I said, with Adam, and even here, the community here in Orlando. I just feel like it made the connection between Jewish Israelis and better, like it kind of created a bridge. Unfortunately, like really horrendous things had to happen, but it just made everyone understand that at the end we are all in this together. I want to share the words of the German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, because I think it's really important that we all keep that in mind and remember that really it's a very important time to speak up and against hatred, against especially terrorists. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Again, thank you all for having me talk, and peace and happiness and health for everyone.
Tonight will be a discussion, but I have a lot of thoughts. And people have been asking me what I think. So I want to begin by sharing my thoughts, and then I really much do want to hear your thoughts as well. Again, for those online, you'll be able to type in the chat. We'll work those into the conversation as we go, and those in person, again, can come up to the mic and share their thoughts too. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3 has some very famous lyrics. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to dance and a time to mourn. I say lyrics because we know of it as a song, right? Turn, turn, turn. The premise behind Ecclesiastes is that everything is part of the natural course of events. We're born, we die, we celebrate, we laugh, we cry. These days, we are not living in natural times. What is happening is not natural. This past Yom Kippur, I spoke about the complicated relationship between Israel and the global Jewish people. Here is a quote from that speech. In my lifetime, post-Yom Kippur War, Israel has not been under existential threat from invading armies. Its three greatest dangers today are Iranian nuclear weapons, trying to swallow the West Bank and choking on it, and suicide by civil war. That was a bold statement that has not aged particularly well. Today, both Israel and the global Jewish people face existential threats. We have to talk about them. We also have to decide how serious they really are and respond appropriately. I think of it like the immune system. I have environmental allergies, and what that means is that my immune system is trying to kill all the trees that are out there, because the tree pollen comes in and the immune system says, kill, 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 and I sneeze and my eyes water and I have problems. But of course, an immune system that doesn't respond at all allows an infection to run rampant. And that can also have dire consequences. We have to diagnose the problem and we have to prescribe the correct level of response. When I spoke those naive words at the end of September, there was a fourth danger. It was not anticipated by me, it was not anticipated by the Israeli army or their intelligence services either, so I don't feel that bad about my mistake. And that fourth existential threat is an Iranian axis of evil, with Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north. On October 7th, there was a bloody invasion and a pogrom by Hamas coming from Gaza. It killed, I think, 1,200 mostly Israeli civilians, kidnapped over 300 more. A number of soldiers were killed. And since then, ongoing rocket fire from Gaza and from South Lebanon has caused 250,000 Israelis to leave their homes and become internal refugees. That is unlivable as a new status quo, an ongoing threat of bloody massacre and ongoing rocket fire reaching all over the country. That is an existential threat. And so Israel is fighting back. For weeks, they bombarded Gaza to hit rocket launchers and bunkers. They responded to Hezbollah rockets in the north. Israel mobilized hundreds of thousands of reservists to cover both fronts, and they shut down normal life to deal with this crisis. The university term was scheduled to start after the end of the holiday of Sukkot. It's been postponed to December because 30% of the students are in the reserves now. The judicial protest organizers that had been running week after week with hundreds of thousands of people, they switched on a dime to volunteering to help those evacuees, even volunteer farming on evacuated kibbutzim to harvest the cabbage. Now, because Hamas operates in civilian areas, often hiding their tunnel entries, their bunkers, their command centers and weapons caches near hospitals and mosques and apartment buildings and refugee camps, the challenge is to hit those legitimate targets of bunkers and caches without killing civilians. And that weapon has not yet been invented. So we have produced thousands of civilian casualties. Now, I will point out, I very rarely have seen in any news stories a delineation of Palestinian casualties between how many are civilians and how many are Hamas fighters, militants, etc. Now, will we ever know? Probably not. The agency giving us the numbers is the Palestinian Health Agency in Gaza, run by Hamas. Now, we do also know that those numbers may be an underestimate because they're not going around checking the rubble. My guess is as time goes on, as that rubble gets cleared, there will be more bodies that are found than those declared even now. Even so, the problem is that children are children, and the death of a child is the death of a child. I heard a line attributed to, I think, Naomi Wolf, who was active in the Socialist Party at the time, and she said, socialism is about being against the gun and for the child. And it doesn't matter whose gun, and it doesn't matter whose child. And so there's that sentiment there, that any child's death is terrible, even if a terrorist is hiding behind the child to launch a rocket into an Israeli city. And so that's another challenge. It's clearly devastating what's happening in Gaza, no matter what the real numbers are or what the division is. And what's an appropriate proportion? If it's 1/4 militants and 3/4 civilians, is that better? If it's half and half, is that okay? These are impossible math problems. In theory, the Jewish community and Israel itself today faces a strategic debate. Do they, one, continue to push the fight against Hamas with the advantage they've achieved so far to continue on to wipe out bunkers, to kill Hamas fighters? Two, do they create what they're calling a humanitarian pause, give civilians a chance to leave even if some Hamas fighters may sneak out? You create humanitarian breathers for a day or two even if that gives Hamas a chance to plot further actions and regroup? Or do you declare a ceasefire, as some have promoted? Ceasefire now. You'll see the protests around. You'll hear people chanting at protests. They want to stop all the killing. There was killing on one side, there's killing on the other side. Stop the killing, they say. But of course, if there's a ceasefire, then Hamas doesn't just escape, Hamas survives. And what does that do? You know, if you don't get the cancer, it comes back. This is not just a strategic question these days. It's a political question, and it's a moral question too. And it impinges on how we relate to each other as a Jewish community. You hear the line, either you're with us or you're against us. And unless you're with us with exactly what we want to do, you're against us. I saw a headline today in Haaretz, which is one of the most progressive newspapers in Israel. It's like the New York Times equivalent there. And the headline from an op-ed columnist was, "These are the Jews who joined the Jew baiters." He's talking about those Jewish groups calling for a ceasefire. You're the enemy because you're making common cause with the enemy to stop us from killing our enemy, Hamas. This week marked 30 days, that Shloshim mourning period, and we're beginning to look forward, just as when we get up from the period of mourning, we look forward to a life without the person we've lost. Now we have to face the implications of this crisis, the new reality that we understand, these existential fears looking us in the face, both in Israel and around the Jewish world. I want to look at 3 of them in Israel and 3 of them for the rest of us. In Israel, the existential threat right in their face at the moment is a multi-front war. This is what Hamas hoped. They wanted a war in Gaza and a full-out assault from the north by Hezbollah with rockets and invasion there, and a full uprising in the West Bank, and possible involvement from other Arab countries as well. That's what they wanted, but it hasn't been fulfilled. Yes, there is the full-scale war in Gaza, and Hamas continues to send rockets out. But there's a low simmer in the north. There's a few rockets here, a few rockets there. It means the people have to leave. And Hezbollah can claim they're doing something. But on the scale of what Hezbollah could do, it's, to use a technical term, bupkis, compared to what they could be doing. And the West Bank is also on kind of a low simmer, has not exploded. And there are occasional rockets from Yemen. You know, that's not what they were hoping for, is the random drone from Yemen making it to Eilat in the south of Israel. Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels in Yemen are sponsored by Iran, as is Hamas. That's that axis of evil surrounding Israel. But they have not really made a dent on the battlefield except in Gaza. Even if there's no imminent threat of total destruction, though, there is an existential fear. One is that Israel can't live in this situation forever. With 250,000 displaced people and no economy and no university studies because 1/3 of the students are in the army, it's not sustainable in the long term. And the only reason it was sustainable before was a concept of deterrence. Hezbollah didn't shoot rockets because Israel would smush them. Gaza didn't invade and Hamas didn't invade or shoot more rockets because of the deterrent factor of what would happen in response. And if Israel does not have that deterrent, if Hamas is fanatical enough to risk what it risks, or Hezbollah doesn't care and feels that Hamas and Iran have its back, it's not livable. There are rockets still hitting Tel Aviv on day 35. And if that's the reality, it's not livable. Second existential challenge for Israel is Israel's positions in the world. We've seen in European capitals and in Arab capitals in even greater numbers protests on behalf of the Palestinians. Now, some of those protests are, I would say, well-meaning protests, those true peaceniks who want a ceasefire to stop the killing. We saw Jewish groups take over the U.S. Capitol with that message, and at the Statue of Liberty as well, just recently. Now, you may say they're naive, but they're doing it from a good place. Some of those protests, though, are not doing it from a good place. They've crossed the line into anti-Semitism. They've justified the massacre of innocent civilians. They're endorsing Hamas. I mean, one of the strangest posters you'll ever see is a picture of someone with purple hair with a poster saying, "Queers for Hamas." Hamas isn't for the queers, to use that phrase. They get thrown off of buildings. They get killed. I mean, what are you rooting for here? A fundamentalist dictatorship? They're not on your side. And then we find the pushing of a slogan to the end of its line. We'll talk about two slogans here. One is, by any means necessary. The argument is that the oppressed population can resist the oppressive power, the colonialist, by any means necessary. Well, what took place on October 7th was any means. I don't think it's necessary. But it was stretching the limits of that. If you can accept that, what was done on October 7th, then you truly accept by any means necessary. But then you're not civilized. Then I think you don't have morals, because you have no limits in the pursuit of your fanatical goal. We've even seen, in support of this by any means necessary, the denial of the means that were used. You know, we live in a post-truth world where anything can be done by AI, and so anything that really happens is thought to be AI if you don't like it. So some people imagine that the Israeli army killed all those people to make the Palestinians look bad, just like the Mossad ran planes into 9/11, or crisis actors played the dead children at Sandy Hook, or nobody really landed on the moon. I mean, this is the world of denial we live in, and it's being applied to this as well. I didn't see pictures of babies with their heads cut off, so it didn't happen. And then when you see them, it must be made up. Because it's hard to admit that the person on your side, the freedom fighter you're rooting for, could break morals so explicitly. But the problem is that this is part of what's happening outside of Israel that makes Israel worried. If we can't get sympathy with this, maybe we can't get sympathy at all. But it goes one step further. Right now, there is still support from Western governments for the Israeli military response against Hamas. After all, it does undercut Iran too, which the US is happy to see happen. But how long will it last as the conflict in Gaza goes on and civilian casualties increase? And the other slogan we've seen at these protests, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, to hear Rashida Tlaib explain it, this is a statement looking for relieving the oppression of the oppressed, creating a kumbaya community of freedom and justice for all. Now, it depends what you mean, because Hamas uses the same slogan. And when Hamas uses the slogan, they mean it will be Jew-free. Or if there are Jews there, as they said about 10 years ago, they can live under the banner of Islam. That means they can be a subordinate minority. They can go back to the world of the Middle Ages, where Jews had to keep their synagogues low and not blow their shofars too loud and face ritual degradation. That Hamas would accept. But an independent state of Israel? No way. Impossible. And the problem with the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is that it's erasing Israel. It's calling the land Palestine as if there can be no Israel for the people to be free. Now, if the slogan were slightly tweaked, from the river to the sea, all people will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine and Israel, it doesn't chant very well, but you could say both names in the countries, and then it would work. You'd be affirming both. You would affirm all people as citizens of one country, fine. But to say the only free country would be called Palestine with that flag is to erase Israel. Whether you want the people to stay or to leave is separate. And I don't think Rashida Tlaib wants to kill all the Jews that live in Israel or from the river to the sea. I'll point out, by the way, that from the river to the sea was also part of the original platform of the Likud party, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party, because they wanted one state from the river to the sea. They just wanted it to be Israel. And there are members of his coalition who would have no problem pushing Palestinians out. So they would want a Palestine-free or a Palestinian-free from the river to the sea. So there are extremists on both sides that want to use this. But when this slogan is chanted, I understand. Some of the people using it mean well. They don't mean genocide. They don't mean killing thousands and millions of Israeli Jews. But when Jews hear it, what they hear is Juden raus, Jews out. And that's how they take it. And I understand. Political slogans are complicated. When a protest movement used the slogan, defund the police, what they meant was reallocate resources into social work and into communal development. And what people heard was, fire all the police officers, close the police departments. You don't always get to decide what people hear. One of the first lessons in therapy is you say something and then the therapist asks your partner, what did they say? What did it mean to you? You learn to hear how your words hit other people. And so if the goal is to move things forward, then you have to find some common ground. Even the protests that want a ceasefire, Israel sees as an existential threat, because they see if they don't get Hamas, if they don't cut out that cancer, it will come back to kill them again. And if they cannot remove that threat of Hamas, you want them gone, or you don't care enough, or your morals are more important than their lives. A third threat to Israel. Does Israel have a future? 6 months ago, they were still asking that question because of the battles between the political right and the political left over what kind of democracy they would have. It's been paused with the military crisis. There are no protests and there's no progress on any judicial reform. That's not going anywhere. But that risk I mentioned at Yom Kippur of suicide by civil war, it's still there. We see in the West Bank settlers sometimes marauding, attacking Palestinians. We see Netanyahu casting blame against the protest movement as if they were in league with Iran, and then deleting that tweet when he gets too much flack, but he said it. We don't know what will happen after in Gaza or in the West Bank. Even in Israel right now, there's an internal hunt for terrorist sympathizers. And the police are investigating willy-nilly anybody who said anything positive about Palestinians, or even maybe someone who said something about a ceasefire, because that's an enemy of the state. Now, there are some Israeli efforts of coexistence. Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims doing things together, having meetings, having protest meetings, having study sessions, having personal encounters. That's happening now too. It's not all one way or the other. But the question remains, what if Israelis lose confidence in the project of Israel? If they say they're always going to hate us, they're always going to bomb us, will we ever, as Herzl promised, die peacefully in our own homes instead of the way we died on October 7th? One of the last major emigration waves from Israel took place after the Yom Kippur War. In 1973, there was a national malaise. And so thousands of Jews chose to leave because they felt their life wasn't there. They didn't believe in the project anymore. Right now, there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis living outside of Israel. Thousands rushed back to serve in the reserves during this crisis. You saw the flights of people. I think they had 110 or 115% turnout from the reserve call-up that they made. But in the long run, how many will get back on those planes? Or how many will get on those planes and find somewhere else? And how many will really return to those homes next to the Gaza Strip and along the Lebanon border, because after all, if you give up 15% of your territory, what does that mean for this project of the state? Of course, the next 15% is the next to come. So Israel faces these existential fears, their position in the world, the possibility of their future, and right in front of them, this multi-front war. But we in diaspora have our fears too. We've seen the stories on the news. We've read the accounts. We've seen anecdotal messages on Facebook and on Twitter, or X. We hear all about rising anti-Semitism. If you subscribe to any Jewish news media publication, you are getting emails 2 and 3 times a day highlighting rising anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitism. Aside from the justification of Hamas atrocities, which we've talked about, there's the genuine anti-Semitism of personal insults, of building vandalism, targeting Jewish institutions and individuals, and not just from their Israeli connections. It's been a synagogue sometimes, no matter what sign they have in front of them. There's the tearing down of the pictures of the hostages, because they must be crisis actors, it can't be real. You heard the story of the threats at Cornell to shoot up the Jewish center there, and personal confrontations in protests or simply on college campuses or on the streets. In the United Kingdom, they have a national organization called the Community Security Trust, and they published their 1-month statistics earlier this week. In that month, from October 7th to November 7th, they reported 1,124 anti-Semitic incidents. This is a 500% increase from the same period in 2022. There were only 183 a year ago, now there's 1,100. But they broke it down by the type of incident, and this is important to hear. 1,124 anti-Semitic incidents, 55 assaults, 112 threats, and 880 incidents of verbal abuse, graffiti, property damage, hate mail, or online abuse. 55 assaults is not nothing, but it's not 1,000 assaults. It's different. Every Facebook post I've ever put on my page or our International Institute page or the Kol Hadash Facebook page that's about Israel gets nasty comments. Now, if Jeremy and I are on our game, we find them, we delete them, we block the users, we clean it up so you don't have to see it. But it happens. And the more we promote the post to the general public, the more people feel the need to comment on it. And sometimes, by the way, we'll post something about klezmer music, and they'll say, Israel is fascist. So that happens. And what's the cost of making a nasty Facebook comment? What effort does it take? It's nothing. And that's been out there, and that's been out there for months. It has nothing to do with the current crisis. Maybe they're a little bit more emboldened. So how we count the statistics, what we react to makes a difference. Again, that 55 assaults is probably up from a year ago. The online abuse, unfortunately, that's the noise for the world we live in. You hear the phrase, it's Kristallnacht all over again, right? Kristallnacht was this week, November 9th to 10th, 1938. But we have to remember the numbers. What happened in Israel on October 7th, that was a Kristallnacht. What happened in Cornell was not. Even what happened in Montreal, where there were a couple of synagogues that had a Molotov cocktail thrown against them, that's not Kristallnacht. On Kristallnacht, 267 synagogues were destroyed in one night. Over 90 Jews were killed, 30,000 were arrested by the government and sent to concentration camps. It was 10% of the Jewish German population in 1938. There would be 600,000 Jews being arrested in America. Nothing like that. Nothing close to that scale. When we have a problem, guess who we call? The police, the government. They're the ones, when we're afraid, we call them. When we have an anti-Semitic incident, we report it to the police, and we don't expect them to arrest us. That's a big difference. Just 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the chief of Bannockburn Police to come over and visit our building, to get to meet me and to talk about what's been going on. He called me to find out what's happening. Doesn't look very Jewish, if I can say so. It's not his personal experience. It doesn't matter. We are citizens of his area that he's responsible for. So we are not alone. It is not Kristallnacht all over again. Those Cornell University threats, within 2 days, the suspect was arrested. And the school absolutely supported the Jewish population. They canceled classes that Friday so people could have a day to get their mental health back. You know, the irony is, this time has also seen a great rise in anti-Muslim activity, anti-Arab activity too. You heard that terrible story in Illinois with the landlord that stabbed the mother and the child, killing the child. I mean, horrific. I was on a security call recently for people who had applied to grants to the state of Illinois, and we were learning how to apply for the money to get the money. It's only been 9 months since we applied for the grant, and now we're finally figuring out how to get the money. 1/3 of the organizations on the call were Jewish, but I would bet about 1/3 of the organizations on the call were Muslim or serving an Arabic-speaking population. And they have just as much of a need of armed security as we do, to make them feel safe and to deal with the verbal threats, the comments on Facebook, sometimes the vandalism, the graffiti, the same kind of challenges that we're facing too. Now, I do not want to minimize how American Jews are feeling. I don't want to minimize the real events that have happened or what it feels like on some college campuses or some online spaces. It's real. I just want us to have some historical perspective, to not have that allergy runaway, and understand that we are in a very different place in America in 2023. The spouse of the vice president is Jewish, as are the grandchildren of the previous president. And on every level of government, we have either people or people married to people who are part of our family. It is absolutely worse now than it was a month ago. And words can become deeds as feelings get more intense. Now, if I say it could still get way, way worse, does that make you feel better? But it's true. Second existential fear we face: is there a Jewish future in the diaspora? Can we trust our neighbors? Can we trust the police, the courts, our political leaders, the public square, including social media as a public square? Do I need to buy a gun? Do I need to take a self-defense class because they're coming for me? Do I avoid public protests as Jews, lest there be confrontations with those supporting Palestinians? Do I attend services in person, or do I stay online only? Do I go to the rally in Washington, D.C., taking place next Tuesday on November 14th? There's a national rally to support Israel I'll talk about in a moment. Do I go there, or am I afraid? And this is, again, not idle. There are pieces of evidence to support fear. You might have heard about a plot in Brazil that was foiled to bomb a Jewish community there by Hezbollah auxiliaries based in Brazil. It's real, and it's terrifying. It echoes the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Argentina in 1994 that killed 85, wounded 300. Guess what? Hezbollah and Iran were behind that one too in 1994. There was a flight from Israel that landed in Dagestan in Russia, and a mob came to beat on the doors and look for who has a Jewish face and who has an Israeli passport. Fortunately, the Israelis traveling had Russian passports that they could use to get out of the threat, but it was a lynch mob. And I mentioned the case in Montreal as well, with the firebomb against the synagogue door. Now again, this is a major difference in scale from the Holocaust or the Tsarist pogroms. Those killed thousands and millions of people. And remember the immune response. An online comment is very different from in-person vandalism. And that's very different from a face-to-face confrontation. And that's very different from physical violence that's not just words. And that's very different from a political movement designed to oppress or to expel Jews. So many times in the last 10 years, I've seen a post about politics or Jewish life that said, and so it begins, ... It begins, ... It begins, ... Well, if it begins and keeps beginning all the time, when does it actually begin? I don't know that it's begun. I doubt it will ever begin. There are thousands of American Jews married to people of other heritage and identity. We work with non-Jewish Americans. We live near them. We socialize with them. We play in sports leagues and community orchestras with them. We share citizenship with them. We serve in the armed forces with them. The vast majority of congresspeople supporting Israel today are not Jewish. The vast majority condemning anti-Semitism are not Jewish. We are not alone, as scary as this moment may be. And so we need to take reasonable steps. If armed security makes sense, then we do it. But we live our life with courage and with conviction. But the biggest threat we face, it's that wolf inside the house, you know? It's the enemy inside the house. It's the fear of the enemy inside the house. It's that fear of our own people. The title of tonight's program was Echad, one people. Now, is that reality or is that fantasy or just an aspiration? On Halloween, the president of the American Jewish University sent out a message, posted an article on his blog and sent it out to all of the people on their email subscription list, saying that the call of the Union for Reform Judaism for a humanitarian pause meant they were sympathizing with the enemy. I didn't think it would take this long, and sure enough, here they are, the idiots who are sympathizing with the enemy. Now, 2 days later, in the same publication, the head of the Union for Reform Judaism wrote a rebuttal saying, no, actually, here's why we're doing what we're doing. You get Jewish groups calling for a ceasefire, like Jewish Voice for Peace or Not in My Name. You get those who want a humanitarian pause, like the URJ or like President Biden has talked about. And you get those who promote prosecuting the war to destroy Hamas no matter what happens. And that's the AJU president and some other voices like that op-ed writer. Now, are all three of those options legitimate Jewish choices? Are all three of their proponents legitimate Jews doing legitimate Judaism? When this March on Washington was announced just last week, actually, I think the beginning of this week, the question was, on November 14th, will progressive Jews be comfortable there? Because it's the Jewish establishment calling the march, the Jewish Federations of North America, the Council of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. I'm on a progressive rabbi's listserv. And so a lot of questions came up. Who's going to be there? Are you going to be there? Are our people going to be there? Are we in danger going to this rally and saying Palestinian lives matter too? Are we going to be welcomed there? The rally said that it was for Israel, for releasing the hostages, and against anti-Semitism. Now, if you come there and it's a rally for Israel, what are the speakers going to say? They might say things you like. They might say things that are beyond what you would say. And does being there endorse what they're saying? Or are you supporting one of the three goals, or two of the three goals? I mean, who's going to be for anti-Semitism in the Jewish community? Can this mean anything Israel does we support? Can it mean multiple things at the same rally? And what does it mean to be out of the consensus in a broad Jewish communal setting? Several years ago, Kol Hadash staffed a booth at a Jewish culture festival in the Chicago area, and we were a little nervous about what the reception would be. We knew that there were more traditional Jews that come to this event, and to the very traditional end of things. We happened to be stationed next to an organization called Echad, which advocates for LGBTQ inclusion in Jewish life. And we were sort of commiserating with each other, like who's going to get more flack between the two of us. And then across the aisle from us was a booth for an organization called Not in My Name, which is supporting Palestinian rights. They got all the flack. Nobody yelled at us. That was the red flag in front of the bull, so to speak. This is an area where people do feel it's life and death. You're with us or you're against us, and if you're doing it wrong, you're out. Now, I will say there is an old Jewish tradition of telling other Jews you're doing it wrong. This goes back a long, read the Bible, it's all over the place, medieval Jewish history, modern Jewish history, one of the oldest Jewish traditions, you're doing it wrong. Now, when the question was whether your dairy products were kosher enough, or if you lit Shabbat candles at exactly the right time. It's low stakes, right? When the disagreement is between choosing a ceasefire that could let the Hamas cancer survive to come back and kill more Israelis, or choosing unrelenting bombing that could destroy Israel's moral legitimacy along with thousands of civilians, or choosing a temporary humanitarian pause to split the difference, which might thread the needle and be successful, or might fail with both disasters where you kill lots of civilians and you let Hamas live. Well, these are high stakes. Politics and morality and strategy and life and death and the future of Israel and the future of the Jewish people all over the world. These are existential questions of war and peace, of life and death, of terrorism and hostages, morality and violence. These are the questions that we face 30 days after the disaster of October 7th. We'll face these questions for the next 30 days and probably 30 days after that too. To end with Ecclesiastes, moving on to chapter 8. He contemplates the experience of disaster, that experience outside of the normal order of things, and he asks a key question. There is a time for every experience, including doom, for a person's calamity overwhelms them. Indeed, they do not know what is to happen, even when it is on the point of happening. And who can tell them what will happen after? What comes next? Well, it will depend on what we do now and how we face these storms. Even if it is worse today than we ever imagined it could be when we fell asleep on October 6th, it's not yet as bad as we fear. If we can find some consensus and work together on shared goals, it doesn't have to be. Those are my thoughts. But I'm curious for your thoughts. If you have questions, concerns, issues you'd like to raise, the chat box is open for those online to comment as well, and those here who'd like to share something, please come up to the mic so those online can hear, or David can pass the mic around, that's fine, that works too. Either works fine for me. I'll check the chat to see if there's anything up there. I see there's a comment in the front row here already.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. So my thoughts are bound up in what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks, and I will be doing next week, which is going to the Illinois Holocaust Museum every day, because I am immersed in training to be an educational docent at the Holocaust Museum. And at the beginning of this process, everybody said, now's the perfect time to be doing this. And I think we all knew what we meant. One of the things that's come out of this to me is that also, having already taught this material, especially talking to students, but also talking to adults, there are easy truths that we have to be able to recognize. And there are complexities that we may never understand. And the third part of that equation is that we cannot allow our pursuit of understanding the complexities to become easy truths. One of the main points of Holocaust education is that there's no people who are a monolith. All Jews did not behave the same way. All Germans did not behave the same way. There's no way that you can summarize how this happened. And how this happened was both how did Jews behave and how did Germans behave, and the choices they made. And you cannot take all the millions of reasons, all the millions of reactions that people have to each incident cumulatively and summarize it in one word. Just as you can't say what Israel is doing in Gaza is genocide. It's a simplification of a monstrous order. So going back to this issue, as I think about it, there is a very simple truth that I think reasonable people should be able to agree on. What Hamas did on October 7th was a monstrosity. It was an act of terrorism. It was not an act of strategic war. It was not a continuation of an ongoing conflict. That should be something that we ought to be able to clarify. I recommend Sam Harris's podcast on this week. He likes to use the phrase, there are bright lines around this that are hard to ignore. And then there's, what is Israel going to do in response? That's complex. And as I think Adam may have just demonstrated, who knows? There may not be a right answer. There probably isn't. And you step back and you try to plug this into the entire 80-year history of this conflict, 100-year history of this conflict. One of the problems is, where do you start tracking the conflict? Because everybody chooses their own starting date. All of these complexities make it impossible for us lay people who don't have the time to study it as scholars to come to a simple truth. The final point is about propaganda, because what I'm immensely disappointed in the United States over this last month is that we, on all sides, but especially on one side, have shown such an easy proclivity to buy into propaganda, and our inability to see what we are saying is being fed to us as lies, as propaganda. The one example is that what Israel is committing is a genocide. And the disappointment is in all of us as adults and educators having an indirect effect, but having an influence on what's happening on college campuses, where most of this behavior is taking place, and in Congress. I was happily at the end. So those are my thoughts.
So some comments from the online, and then we can share it here as well. Declark comments that there was a ceasefire on October 6th that Hamas broke. What was done was brutal and unacceptable. It's not freedom fighters. A ceasefire is realistic if the hostages come home. Maybe if the hostages were released, then you could talk ceasefire. That's more realistic. Cynthia comments, condemning the actions of Israel is not an endorsement of Hamas. Many of us condemn both, and it's not from a place of ignorance or naivete, and I'm heartbroken that others can't see that. I see people who are well-educated, smart, sensitive people on all sides of this issue. Beverly Jarno appreciates my perspective that recognizes that as painful as these assaults are, they shake us from complacency, but we have allies to protect us. Someone's thankful to be with people that can acknowledge and understand nuance and complexion. Someone asks if the National Society for Humanistic Judaism is participating in the rally on Tuesday. Surprised they didn't ask us. That happens all the time. We're overlooked in these things. I'm sure there'll be individual members who are there. I don't know that there's one group that's going. I do know that there's a whole alphabet soup of progressive Jewish groups that are going, and they're calling it the Progressive Bloc. It's like they're strength in numbers if they're all marching together. So this group Teruah, which is a rabbinic association, Americans for Peace Now, Reconstructing Judaism, and the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association, all kinds of other groups are planning to have an active presence there. And so you'll find like-minded people there if you are in DC. I think there may be an online portion, but they really want to push people to go in person, so they haven't released that. If there is information about that, or I'm sure it'll be covered on news networks too, you can certainly participate virtually in that way as well. A few comments here.
Should I be standing or sitting? Or?
Does it?
You're good. I'm good. Thank you. Comment of personal, I think despair is the right word. Realistically, militarily, I think it's impossible to totally wipe out Hamas. I mean, Netanyahu says this, he has to say it. He's the leader of the armies going in. Yes, we're going to wipe out our enemy. I don't think you can. Physically, you cannot. And so when I try and say, well, where is the end game that's good for Israel? I'm afraid I can't find it, and this scares the hell out of me.
Bill?
Do we hold the state of Israel to a higher standard than the United States of America and United Kingdom? In World War II, nobody said, don't bomb Dresden, don't bomb Berlin, well, then I cannot fault Israelis for going in there and wiping these people out.
Well, here's the analogy I think of. If you had a hijacked airplane that had 3 terrorists and 100 passengers on the plane, can you blow up the plane to kill the hijackers? In theory, but most people would say 100 to 3 is not a reasonable risk proportion. I asked someone who's well read on this subject this week, have you seen any breakdown of the terrorist to civilian casualties? And he said, well, I saw something in the New York Times that suggested 1/4 were fighters. So out of 10,000 people, that's 2,500 or so. That's 4,000 kids to 2,500 fighters, or 7,000 civilians to 3,000 fighters. What's the right proportion? They talk about proportionality in international law for civilian casualties that are what they call collateral damage. And we did it in Afghanistan, we did it in Iraq, it happened all over the place. It is part of war in the modern world. But what's the right proportion? And is it wrong to be sad about the collateral damage? No. But what the right number is, there's no consensus. And so I don't fault those who are upset at the civilian casualties. I think the challenge is, who's to blame? They talk about releasing the Israeli hostages. We should be talking about the Palestinian hostages of Hamas, which is everybody who's not Hamas, who's in Gaza. They are Palestinian hostages of Hamas, and they should be released too. It should be all of them. Release all the hostages, including them. But that would require empathy with the other, the enemy people, and that's hard to do in a time of conflict like this. Just this week on my YouTube feed, I saw a video from 1944 that was one of these propaganda cartoons making fun of the Ductators. It was all these duck characters acting like Mussolini and Hitler. And the caricatures of the Japanese in this cartoon, put your teeth on edge. But that's what happened. And alas, that's what happens sometimes. So I think it's going to be a hard row to hoe for Israel in the next few weeks, dealing with these civilian casualties. As it turns out, the physical invasion has had fewer Israeli casualties than they expected, and that's a good thing. The challenge is they're going house by house looking for every tunnel and every cache and every rocket launcher, and that's going to take a long time. I said 30 days, it could be 60 days, it could be 90 days. We don't know how long this is going to last and what happens to the civilians. And when they're done with the north, what do? Do they say, okay, do-si-do, everybody go back north and we're going to go in the south and clean out things? What happens to the Palestinian civilians then? We have no answers. As Larry said, we don't know what's to happen ever. We don't know what's to happen in the next 30 days. When they're done with Gaza City, what's next? We don't know. And I don't think Israel knows. That's the dilemma we're all in. Sorry.
Hi, I'm going to try and look at you because one of the things I need to bring this to a local thing because I can't do anything personally about what's going on in Israel, and neither can any of us. But how do we talk to each other? Not you guys, I mean, everybody else. And I can't even be on social media anymore because it's so distressing. And that's maybe not a bad thing. But I fear that we can't talk to each other anymore because people don't want to listen to each other anymore. And it's all propaganda all over the place. And it's very painful. And even people that you like personally will make a comment. And it's very similar to how we all felt after the election when Trump was elected, and people were just so hostile. And that gives me despair. I mean, forget everything else that's so despairing, but what's happening to us? And I don't know how to deal with it. And many of you know I own a Pilates studio, I'm a Pilates teacher, and there's always this feeling that you have to make a statement. right? Whatever's going on, it's as a business or as a figure. I'm not even a public figure, but everybody needs to make some statement of whatever. And I had a colleague in New York who's Jewish, who travels to Israel all the time. She has family there. She teaches there. And she made a post about supporting her colleagues in Israel. And the vitriol that came back at this poor woman, who is the nicest person in the world, just gave me pause. And my reaction was, well, I'm not going to say anything. So I don't know what to do with that.
Some comments online as well. Am I off or on? Am I? The thoughts on calls for Netanyahu to resign, I'll touch on that in a minute. I was appalled by Hamas's attack. I don't like the civilian deaths in Gaza. Sometimes it seems there's no place for thinking like that. The Palestinians are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. They identify with the oppressor. Dikla is saying, no Israeli parent is happy sending their child to fight in Gaza, but everyone understands that knocking out Hamas needs to be done. If Israel doesn't protect itself from Hamas, all the other terror organizations will jump on the opportunity. That's that deterrence I talked about. We live by different values, and that's the challenge. And then Adam comments, what's been disturbing, he tends to write long, I know, but because he's one of our students. What tends to be disturbing to me in all this is a lack of morally defensible position on those who have supported Hamas even before Israel began their action. This is a group opposed to humanistic principles. When college students shout glory to the martyrs or project it onto screens, there's a deep systemic problem at our educational institutions. And when parts of the progressive left, and some parts don't, stand in solidarity with Hamas, they're supporting a group that would be happy to destroy most of what they represent. And again, distinguish between Hamas and Palestinians in general. There are plenty of Palestinians outside of Gaza who left because of Hamas and hate Hamas, but they don't want to see Gaza destroyed and their family killed. And then another question was the response to progressive groups like Democratic Socialists and Black Lives Matter and so on, not condemning Hamas. As a liberal millennial Jew, it's been heartbreaking to see so many young comrades turn their backs on Jews in Israel at this time, and so on. So again, a lot of hard feelings, and sometimes people that we thought were our friends or that supported those values have not supported us. In fact, there was a mass resignation from Democratic Socialists of America just this week. Some 25 members of their sort of central committee quit because of their response to this. They said, we've been socialists for our whole lives. We were part of the founders in 1982 when they started the organization, and they simply can't support it anymore because of what's been happening. So there's been a fracturing, and you might have seen also, there were Democrats who voted to censure Rashida Tlaib for her, Representative Tlaib for her statements on both the hospital bombing and also the river to the sea comment. So the left is not, monolithic one way or the other, but it has found a home there, just as we've seen parts of the right that are also anti-Jewish. Charlie Kirk from Turning Point commented that all the problems in the universities are because of all this Jewish money going to liberal causes and universities, and that's what, so, you can get it from both sides. And sort of a funny version of response to that is some months ago, Elon Musk said, when you're getting criticized from the right and the left, you're doing it correct. And then someone responded, tell me you're not Jewish without telling me you're not Jewish. Because if you're happy getting attacked from the right and the left, you're not Jewish. Comment back here?
My sons told me tonight before coming, try not to keep disjointed sentences. I remember growing up, being in BBG and the AZA, and I had friends at that time that were in the Holocaust or had parents in the Holocaust. And they always kept saying, remember, it can always happen. We're going back 60, 70 years. It can always happen. I look at this right now going on. I haven't turned the TV off from the Script channel or from WTTW talking about this. I keep seeing our president, who in the beginning said, I'm for Israel no matter what. Nobody could do this and get away with it. And the more that you see all the marches taking place, all you see is people who are on scholarships in the United States. Many of them are not US citizens or never would have been. And there they are, marching away, stamping on flags, no matter which flag. And it isn't only just that the Jewish people are in problems now. Other religions have problems. But you see the group that's getting all this attention now, you see what they are. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, nobody wants to lose any children. I don't know how many relatives I might have lost during the Second World War. I lost a couple servicemen, uncles. And I just see it, it's terrible, yes, but we have to do something. Otherwise, we in the United States sit here, I won't be around that much longer, but we sit here and our kids are gonna have a real problem. They're starting to have a problem right now in schools. So I really think that the people in the United States, Jews and Catholics and other people, need to really step up, take a look and say, we have to stop and do something as far as what's going on. And the rabbi was mentioning about that, the representative and what she was saying. She said, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just standing up for what I think is right. Yeah.
So she's not anti-Semitic.
Right.
But the dilemma becomes, and she was censored, by the way, I think it was like 400 to 20. I mean, it was overwhelming. No, the vote for the censure was more even, I think. It was more even. But there were 20 Democrats that voted for that as well. I think the other challenge that we have today is, well, two things. One is media. If you watch CNN for more than 45 minutes, you're going to get the same story 6 times. And so you think, wow, another march. No, it's the same march. Several weeks ago, there was a day where Hamas called for an international day of jihad. And people were afraid to come to services. And you know, they stayed home, or they didn't go out. A lot of Jewish schools closed. There was an incident in Beijing. There was a violent incident in France. There was a march in New York, but you know, you can't throw a stick and not see a march in New York. I mean, that's how it goes. Of a few thousand people. Nothing. But if you watch the news, day of jihad, day of jihad, day of jihad. March in New York, march in New York, march in New York. So sometimes we have to tune down the media. You talked about getting off social media. Sometimes news media also serves to inflame our sense of panic. Change the channel. Sorry, there we go. The other thing we have to manage is we have this thing in America called free speech. And that includes public protest. The right to assemble, the right to petition for redress of grievances, like that's constitutional. And we're at a place now where we sometimes treat speech like speech is violence. There's no freedom of violence. I'm not allowed to punch you in the face. I'm allowed to say I don't like your face. That's free speech. Or is that verbal assault? Or is it a microaggression? Or is it a diminution of your humanity? Well, we're trying to tease out these balances. And so burning a flag is free speech. We used to be fine with that in the liberal world in the 1980s. I mean, we weren't thrilled by it. We didn't promote it, but we allowed it. So if someone burns an Israeli flag, that's free speech. I can't stop them. I can't expel them. And that comment about feeling besieged, by the way, go into some Arab American media spaces right now. See what they're saying about freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and a feeling of persecution. Do you know what just happened at Columbia University this week? Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine were dechartered as student organizations by the university administration until next semester. Because they did an unscheduled protest, and they were threatening and verbally abusive, and so the university canceled their ability to meet as student groups for the next month and a half. They would say their rights are being violated. They are under assault for what they're trying to say. In Florida as well, similar kind of threats have been made against organizations like this. So we both feel besieged. That was the irony of that security meeting, where we had Jewish and Muslim groups both hiring security services because we're afraid of each other at this moment. Or we're afraid of other members of our communities or our broader community of concern. And that's what's tragic about the moment that we're in. Sorry, we have a comment back there.
It's, like you said, it's complicated. And I think that's one of the problems, that people are looking for simple solutions to complicated problems. And the question you raised about, do you march or not march? In my perspective, the only value of a march is making the participants feel good. It really affects nothing. And I think historical marches, I mean, after the last president was elected, there was March by Women, and millions of women to affect change, which didn't happen because of the march. I think people march to feel good, but I think what Mark raises, the issue of talking and education, it's difficult. So being difficult makes it complicated. And I appreciate Dawn's comment on social media, which I think has been probably one of the worst inventions of man today.
I do want to mention one place where our speech is valuable, and it does make a difference, and that's actually in two areas. One is in contacting public officials. People are reporting they're getting lots of calls at their congressional offices on all sides of the issue. And if you want your voice to be heard, you have representatives. You have senators at the state and the federal level, and those are people you can contact. And contact their offices, let them know what you think and what your value is. I'm not telling you the right answer, but you have your values that you want expressed in the world. We have a means to do that in a representative democracy. And the other place where your messages are important is between you and someone else. Whether it's a person you know, if someone makes an obnoxious comment online and you know that person well and you think they'll listen to you, you don't have to comment in front of everybody. Call them up, meet for coffee, send them a personal and say, I saw what you said here, I had some thoughts about it. Are you open to talking? You make that personal one-to-one contact, you can communicate, you can maybe change a mind. It takes a while. It's hard, but it can happen. And the other people you can use that personal contact with are people who need support. This week, I was an online Zoom webinar for rabbis who are trying to deal with this moment of crisis. And the presenter talked about what it was like for her leading the largest LGBTQ congregation during the AIDS epidemic, and then through 9/11, and they were in New York, and now through this. And how does she manage all of that? One of the things that she said is she actually works with her rabbinic interns to train them in how to provide pastoral care to people they disagree with personally or politically. Because you get people who might say obnoxious things, but you still have to care for them. You still have to help them with their funeral or through their illness. That's part of our job as pastoral care professionals. The other thing that she said that was vitally important was how important it is to think about the person who is suffering directly. And so one of the first things I did on October 7th and October 8th was I took the contacts of every Israeli rabbi that I had met through our contacts with our association there, and I sent them a personal note. And I said, I'm so sorry to hear what's going on. I hope you're safe, and I hope we find peace soon, something generic. But at least they heard from somebody to say, I'm thinking about you, I care about you, and that's important. If you know people who are there, who are going through this moment of national trauma, because as I said, it was a Kristallnacht for them, that equivalent of a shattering of what they could expect, they need that support and they will need that support. I know there's some other comments in the chat. I know we're already well past time to eat some nice food and have a chance to chat with each other on a more uplifting subject. So I want to thank you all for your attention and your involvement. And what? Scroll up, you want to see more of the comments? That the rabbi's nice and rational and knowledgeable, that's useful. Yeah, that's nice to hear from our Rabbi Emeritus, so it's only mildly self-serving since he helped to found the congregation. Okay, in any case, I want to thank you all for coming, thank the Kleins again for hosting our Oneg in person, thank all of you online who joined us and also provided some important insights and comments in the chat, and were civil to each other in the chat where it's even easier to be obnoxious. That was wonderfully done, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here. Our closing song, which is again back to our service, is a song called Hevenu Shalom Aleichem, again the aspirational desire to bring peace in the world and to each other. So if you're comfortable joining me, please do. Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom, shalom, shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom aleichem, Eivenu shalom, shalom, shalom aleichem. Once again, I wish you a Shabbat shalom. I wish Shabbat shalom to all the people online. And if you'd like to unmute yourself and wish a verbal Shabbat shalom, the anarchy of sound will be just fine. So feel free to unmute and talk.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom from Tucson.